What's up, my people? This is Mr. Tui, creator of the Digital SAT Crash Course series. And in this video, we're going to pick up right where we left off on my earlier Digital SAT Grammar Rules video. And I'm going to show you step by step how to apply my grammar rules on a wide variety of questions from the Digital SAT reading and writing section. The instruction that appears in this video comes directly from my recently recorded Digital SAT Crash Course series. So if you like this video and you're learning from my instruction, you definitely want to get access to the full version of the course. Just click the link in the description below to get access. In the meantime, sit back, relax, and enjoy Digital SAT Grammar Rules Part 2. 22. Oh, this one's tough. 22. Catherine, you are up. Go ahead and read 22 for us, please.
Okay, I'll just plug in answer choice
Plug in answer
A,
choice A right off the bat. Absolutely.
In 1937, Chinese-American screen actor Anna May Wong, who had portrayed numerous villains and secondary characters but never a heroine, finally got a starring role in Paramount Pictures' Daughter of Shanghai, a film that critic Stina Shin claims expanded the range of possibilities for Asian images on screen.
How does answer choice A sound right now, Catherine?
Oh, it didn't sound terrible.
It doesn't sound terrible. Let's keep it. Let's plug in answer choice B. And I think we should be able to plug it in. You can just take it from finally got a starring role. I think we'll be.
Finally got a starring role in Paramount Pictures' Daughter of Shanghai, a film that critic Stina Shin claims expanded the range of possibilities for Asian images on screen.
You read it beautifully there. You took the pauses where all the commas are. You got to read it accurately to test the answer choice. You did it perfectly. How does answer choice B sound?
I mean, it doesn't sound terrible either.
It doesn't sound terrible either. All right, well, let's keep it. Let's plug in C.
Whoa, okay. Finally got a starring role in Paramount Pictures' Daughter of Shanghai, a film that critic Stina Shin claims expanded the range of possibilities for Asian images on screen.
How does answer choice C sound?
Not that great.
Well, what's the rule we're being tested on here?
Oh, wait, never mind. Actually,
What's the rule? What's the rule?
The rule is if you use, like, the whole name.
Yes.
Like, the whole title.
Yes. A name with the title. This is critic Stina Chin.
Yeah.
Does that make some sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, it's just like the Pablo Picasso example.
Mm-hmm.
It's really tough. A lot of students read A and B and they're like, hey, those sound pretty good. And they don't sound terrible. They don't. That's why I got to know the rules. But whenever you see a full title like this, I'm telling you, you want to avoid those commas. And frankly, you don't need them. I know it's a mouthful. I get it. But you just don't need the commas around critic and after critic and Stina Chin. You don't. I'm going to read it one more time. It should sound all right. So this lady finally got a starring role in Paramount Pictures' Daughters of Shanghai, a film that critic Stina Chin claims expanded the range of possibilities for Asian images on screen. That's a lot, but it works.
Yeah.
If you know the rule, you've got a full title here. You just don't need to break that up. Does that make some sense?
Yes, it can be confusing.
It can be very confusing, right? Because when I saw this the first time too, I was like, oh man, I'm not quite sure what the rule is here. Right? Because I thought A didn't sound too bad. Some students tend to go with B or D because they're like, don't you need a comma before a quotation? I've had students say that their teachers have told them that. You always have to have a comma before a quotation. That's not true. That's not a thing. You just need a comma whenever you need a brief pause. That's it. Now, sometimes there might be some cases where you need a pause before the quotation, but often, I'd say more often than not on the SAT, you don't. So don't make up rules that don't exist. Like literally every single rule that you need is on that rules document, essentially. If it's not on that rules document, you don't need it. You can drop everything your English teachers have told you. Right? And I'm serious. I would recommend it. Because I've heard some students say, they've avoided some answers because they're like, my teacher said never use you in an essay. But sometimes the right answer is you, especially if the author's referring to you elsewhere in the paragraph. Does that make sense? Why you'd have to go with it. So just, drop all the other stuff. Stick with the rules I've got. It's all you need. I've reverse engineered that grammar rule list from the questions on the digital SAT. And if it's a rule that's tested, it's on there. And if it's not tested, it's not on there. Okay. Plug in D. I just want to hear D.
Okay. Finally got a starring role in Paramount Pictures' Daughter of Shanghai, a film that critic Stina Shin claims expanded the range of possibilities for Asian images on screen.
Does that make sense why you just don't need those pauses there? Does that make some sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does.
It's just not good, right? But again, some students are going to pick that because I need a comma before the punctuation, but it doesn't sound good. You don't need it there. It is answer choice C. So be aware, man, when you see a full title of a name or a thing, when in doubt, leave it out. When in doubt, leave it out. Even it's a mouthful. I get it, but you don't need the pauses there. Does that make sense, Catherine? Okay. Ruby, Maria, any questions about that?
No.
Okay. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to Digital SAT Reading and Writing Crash Course. This is day 1. We're on part 2, coming back from a little break. And we're still rolling through these questions here on Digital SAT Practice Test number 1. We're practicing applying the grammar rules. We're on number 23. And I'm not sure who did the last one. Catherine, actually, you did the last one, didn't you, right? So, Maria, you are up. Go and read question 23 and plug in answer choice A right off the bat. We'll hear how it sounds.
In 1637, the price of tulips skyrocketed in Amsterdam, with single bulbs of rare varieties selling for up to the equivalent of $200,000 in today's U.S. dollars. Some historians claiming that this tulip mania was the first historical instance of an asset bubble, which occurs when investors drive prices to highs not supported by actual demand.
Great. All right. How does answer choice A sound?
I don't think it sounds right.
I don't think it sounds right either. And you don't even have to know exactly why, but it's like, it doesn't sound good. It doesn't feel right. That's never a good sign. Plug in answer choice B, and I think you can take it from some historians.
Some historians claim that this tulip mania was the first historical instance, etc.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think about answer choice B?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it sounds okay.
It sounds better.
Certainly better than A. Okay. Plug in answer choice B. I want to hear answer choice B.
Okay. Some historians have...
Yeah. I meant C. I apologize. Answer choice C.
Some historians have claimed that this tulip mania was the first historical instance of an asset bubble.
Okay, we can stop there. How do you think answer choice C sounds?
Having claimed, that doesn't sound right.
It doesn't quite sound right. Never a good sign. Try D. Let's take it from some historians.
Okay. Some historians, too, claim that this tulip mania was the first historical instance of an asset bubble.
How does answer choice D sound?
It's wrong.
That's really bad, right? Like, this is one of those examples where, like, boy, going with your instincts is enough. You just need a verb here, right? Now, it's a little bit tricky because some students are going to look at this and they're going to be like, oh, they're talking about some example from history from the past, so I need, like, the past tense. And they'll pick C. But if you plug it in, it sounds like trash. And the reason why is that historians are claiming right now, right, in the present, some historians right now claim that this mania was the first historical instance of an asset bubble. And that's why the present tense works here. That's why it sounds the best. But the others just sound like trash. Get rid of them. If it sounds really bad, that's good enough here. That's good enough here. Is that clear?
Yep.
Okay, good. Question 24 is tough. This is one of the toughest on the practice test. I'll guide you through it, Catherine. Right off the bat, plug in answer choice A, but let's hear it. You got to pay close attention to the ideas here. So let's read it carefully for meaning here.
Okay. Researchers studying magnetosensation have determined why some soil-dwelling roundworms in the southern hemisphere move in the opposite direction of Earth's magnetic field when searching for food. In the northern hemisphere, the magnetic field points down into the ground, but in the southern hemisphere, it points up toward the surface and away from worms' food sources.
All right, that's a lot of words there going on. How does the answer choice A sound right now?
It doesn't sound right.
Yeah, what do you think's wrong with it?
I don't think the colon makes sense there.
Yeah, when do we use a colon?
When you're having like a list or a description or when you're explaining something?
Yes. Very versatile. Could be an explanation or a list or a description. Okay, clearly it's not a list here. Could it be the colon as a description or an explanation? Potentially.
Okay.
Right? I mean, these are the terms you just have to think in. Like, okay, are we introducing an explanation or description?
Oh, what it is? Is it an explanation or description?
Yeah, I mean, could we be introducing an explanation or description of something?
I guess.
Possibly, like an explanation or description of what?
Of the hemispheres?
Well, you see, the colon, if it was explaining the hemispheres, it would come after the hemispheres. So we're not explaining the hemisphere, right? It would be explained describing something that it comes after.
Food?
Searching for food. It's not really describing food here.
So then it's wrong.
Well, yeah, I mean, probably not. It might not be like the word itself here. Here's how I'm looking at it right now. Is that it could be an explanation or description of why some soil-dwelling roundworms in the northern hemisphere move in the opposite direction of the Earth's magnetic field when searching for food. That's a mouthful, but that's one idea. Why some soil-dwelling roundworms in the southern hemisphere move in the opposite direction of the Earth's magnetic field when searching for food. Does that make some sense?
Yes, it does.
Right, it's one big idea. It's complicated, right? And it's not necessarily going to be just the last word. Like, it's not a description of food. Clearly not. But it could be a description of why some soil-dwelling roundworms in the southern hemisphere move in the opposite direction of the Earth's magnetic field when searching for food. One big, long idea, but that's one big idea. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, that's tricky. I'm not sold on it, right? Especially seeing this for the first time. But I would consider it. Okay, let's test B. Plug in B. Let's look at the others.
Researchers studying magnetization have determined why some soil-dwelling roundworms in the southern hemisphere move in the opposite direction of Earth's magnetic field when searching for food. In the northern hemisphere, the magnetic field points. Okay, it doesn't really make sense.
What's wrong with that?
The comma. It's not that it's an unnecessary pause, but it just doesn't explain why.
It doesn't explain why. That's not necessarily an issue. There's a bigger issue with B. There's a bigger issue here. And it's tough to catch maybe because you kind of stopped halfway through reading the rest of the paragraph. But I'll tell you the problem with B. If you go with B, the comma, you've got two standalone statements separated by a comma. It's tough to catch. But I'm going to read the first half. Tell me if it stands alone. Researchers studying magnetosensation have determined why some soil-dwelling roundworms in the southern hemisphere move in the opposite direction of Earth's magnetic field when searching for food. Does that stand alone?
Yes.
Yes. Listen to the second half. In the northern hemisphere, the magnetic field points down into the ground, but in the southern hemisphere, it points up toward the surface and away from the worm's food sources. Does that stand alone?
Yes.
Two long statements, but both of them stand alone. Does that make some sense?
Uh-huh.
That's very tough to catch. I think you do need a pause there. I think you do. But it can't be a comma, because that's a comma splice. Okay? Very tough.
So then it has to be.
Yeah, well, let's try C. I want to hear C. Plug in C.
Researchers studying magnetization have determined why some soil-dwelling roundworms in the southern hemisphere move in the opposite direction of Earth's magnetic field when searching for food, while in the northern hemisphere, the magnetic field points down to the ground, but in the southern hemisphere, it points up toward the surface and away from worms' food sources.
Now, it's funny. You took a pause after food, right? Because you naturally want to take a pause there. You should, by the way, right? You got to read it accurately as written, and it'll sound more like this. Researchers studying magnetosensation have determined why some soil-dwelling roundworms in the southern hemisphere move in the opposite direction of Earth's magnetic field when searching for food, while in the northern hemisphere. The magnetic field points down. Ooh, okay. What's wrong with that? I mean, besides the fact that it feels off, which I think it does.
Well, it's not really a contrasting statement, so I don't think it makes sense if they put while. Well, while is not a contrasting transition word, but it doesn't make sense there.
Yeah, what's interesting, here's the thing about C. If you go with C, who is searching for food while in the northern hemisphere?
Some soil-dwelling roundworms.
Yeah, some soil-dwelling roundworms in the southern hemisphere. Right? That's the subject here. So, some soil-dwelling roundworms in the southern hemisphere move in the opposite direction of Earth's magnetic field while searching for food while in the northern hemisphere? How are they soil-dwelling roundworms in the southern hemisphere? How are they searching for food in the northern hemisphere? Which is what answer choice C is suggesting.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Does that make sense why that's not right? I mean, that's impossible, actually, right? Because if they're in the northern hemisphere, they're soil-dwelling roundworms in the northern hemisphere, not in the southern hemisphere. Plug in D. This is a lot here. This is just a tough sentence. Is this one sentence? Yeah, it is all one sentence. This is not good writing, by the way, right? Writing just should be more clear. It's annoying that they do this, right? I mean, I would just write it differently. I would. But they're testing some of the grammar rules here. But the ideas matter here. Because C is suggesting that southern hemisphere worms are in the northern hemisphere. And that ain't right. Plug in D. I want to hear it.
Researchers studying magnetization magnetosensation have determined why some soil-dwelling roundworms in the southern hemisphere move in the opposite direction of Earth's magnetic field when searching for food in the northern hemisphere.
Okay, stop. Right? Do you see the issue there?
Yeah.
The ones in the southern hemisphere aren't in the northern hemisphere. And that's what C and D are suggesting. So there, it's the ideas, really, that make C and D unacceptable. Does that make some sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, because, I mean, if it were just a different sentence or something else in the northern hemisphere that's searching for food while in the northern hemisphere, that could be fine. But the ideas make C and D wrong. So you got to read for meaning. Does that make some sense?
It does.
That's a tough question. Maria, does that question make some sense?
Yeah. I mean, now it does.
Yeah. Oh, when I saw it the first time, I was clueless. Like, I really did not know what was going on. It took me a while to figure out. But again, you just got to pay attention to the ideas. Can't be C or D, because those just don't make sense with the context of the paragraph. And it can't be B, because that's a comma splice, two standalone statements separated by a comma. Sometimes it's best to go with elimination, right? Because you might be like iffy about A, but you know for sure it's not B, C, or D if you pay close attention.
But if you use elimination, wouldn't that take a long time? Like, wouldn't you lose a lot of time?
It does, but let me tell you, the timed element is just not as big of a factor on the digital SAT as it was on the old SAT. Not even close. Like, you're going to finish in time, especially with a little bit of practice. You really will. You've got roughly, you've got over a minute per question, and you've got time to do it. You've got time to do it. You really do, especially with practice. So I recommend it. But and remember, to start, you're always doing untimed work anyway. It's just like thinking clearly about the questions. You're gonna see questions like this again and again, where they're testing on the colon rule or where they're testing on the comma splice. The more familiar you get with the questions, the faster the process will become. And we're just getting started here on this. I mean, have you done any digital SAT grammar prep on your own, either of you, yet up until this point? Have you?
Well, it's similar to how the digital PSAT was, but I wasn't prepared for how it was going to be. So I used all the rules I used before and when they had it written down, not for the digital one.
Yeah, and so the old version of the SAT. There's a lot of unnecessary stuff. Yeah, from the old SAT. They've gotten rid of half of the rules they used to test on. It's a lot less.
I had done a practice digital PSAT before I took my PSAT.
But you weren't really studying the grammar rules. You weren't practicing applying them, or that's correct. Yeah. So I mean, that's kind of the stage we're at right now. Is just thinking clearly about it and understanding it. The speed will come. But yeah, I really recommend testing them all. Absolutely. Even if you read one that you think sounds good, don't stop there. You really need to test them all. And if you can get rid of the bad ones and confirm the right one, you know you're on the right track. You've got the time to do it. You do. But you got to start thinking about it clearly first. Regardless, that's a tough question. That's tough for me. That is. But does it make sense why it's A there?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let's do 25. This one's a little bit easier. Was that you, Catherine? You did the last one, I think? Yeah. So, Maria, you are up next. Go ahead and read 25 for us, please. Plug in A right off the bat.
Scientists believe that, unlike most other species of barnacle, turtle barnacles can dissolve the cement-like secretions they use to attach it to a sea turtle shell, enabling the barnacles to move short distances across the shell's surface.
Okay. How does the answer choice A sound to you?
Completely wrong.
Yeah, it sounds terrible. Do you have any idea what rule we're being tested on here? You can kind of look at the answer choices and get a sense of what it is.
I mean, just with the right possessive, I don't know.
Yeah, those are all pronouns. Those are all pronouns. Yeah,
okay.
So, we're picking the right pronoun here. That's it. Make it match pronouns. Who or what is being attached to a turtle shell? Do you have any idea here?
The turtle barnacle.
The turtle barnacles. Right? Do you see that? Turtle barnacles.
Mm-hmm.
So we're probably going to need a plural. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, okay, good. Plug in B. Let's hear it.
Okay. Scientists believe that, unlike most other species of barnacle, turtle barnacles can dissolve the cement-like secretions they use to attach themselves to a sea turtle shell. Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. How does that sound?
That sounds better.
That sounds much better. Okay. Let's try C.
That sounds right.
Yeah, because C is plural, though, as well. Let's try C.
Okay. Scientists believe that, unlike most other species of barnacle, turtle barnacles can dissolve the cement-like secretions they use to attach them to a sea turtle.
How does that sound?
It's wrong.
Yeah. Doesn't sound as good as B, does it?
Mm-mm.
It doesn't. Do we need to test D?
No.
No, that's singular. That's singular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It is going to be B, absolutely. And does it make sense why you have to say themselves here? Does that make sense? I mean, it sounds nice, which is a good sign, right? They're the one, they're attaching themselves. If they were attaching something else or some other things, you could say maybe they're attaching them to a shell, but they're attaching themselves to the shell.
Yes.
It's got to be B, and that's why it sounds the best. Does that make some sense?
Yeah.
But even just recognizing that you need a plural here, and again, it's not turtle barnacle, that'd be singular, it's turtle barnacles, plural. You can get rid of A and D, no problem. But B sounds the best. So kind of combining the rules and your instincts here is really helpful. Questions about that one?
No.
Okay. And you'll see some dramatic differences in the difficulty level of the questions, like compared to 24. 24 is brutal. Don't spend like 5 minutes on it, on a timed test. Of course not. Don't. But a lot of the questions like that one, you're going to find the answer in a very short period of time, less than a minute, maybe closer to 30 seconds. All right. Question 26. Catherine, you're up. Go ahead and read this for us and plug in answer choice A right off the bat.
Okay. The classic children's board game Chutes and Ladders is a version of an ancient Nepalese game. Paramaparas.
That thing. Yeah. By the way, don't worry too much about proper names or right. Don't. I literally have some read that guy or that thing is good enough.
Okay.
Just because you don't want to take the time or the mental energy worrying about pronouncing something like that. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Yeah.
Got it. In both games, players encounter good or bad spaces while traveling along a path. Landing on one of the good spaces allows a player to skip ahead and arrive closer to the end goal.
Okay, how's answer choice A sound?
Not bad.
I don't think it sounds bad. Okay, let's keep it. Notice the use of the semicolon here in the sentence, by the way. You see that?
Yeah. Actually, it doesn't sound that great, actually.
It doesn't sound that great?
Isn't that for it's not the right subject or verb agreement?
Well,
right?
Now we're thinking the right terms, right? That is the rule here, right? We've got four different verbs. Well, 4 different verbs in the answer choices. We've got different verb terms. Absolutely right. They could be test tense and make it match tense potentially because we see some different tenses as well. But most of the time, it's make it match subject verb agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I think this is players, so it wouldn't be A.
Well, let's talk about who or what the subject is.
Okay.
Because I don't think that's super clear. It's not. It's not. Actually, before we do that, I want to plug in B. I want to hear B. I want to hear it.
In both games, players encounter good or bad spaces while traveling along a path. Landing on one of the good spaces are allowing a player to skip ahead and arrive closer to the end goal.
How's the answer choice B sound?
I don't like it. I don't think it's right.
Really bad. Is that clear? Try C. I just want to hear these right now. We'll talk about applying the rule in just a moment. And take it from landing. I think is good enough.
Yeah. Landing on one of the good spaces have allowed a player to skip ahead and arrive closer to the end goal.
How does C sound?
It's wrong.
That is not right. Try D.
Landing on one of the good spaces allow a player to skip ahead and arrive closer to the end goal.
How does D
I
sound?
think that's right.
Okay. Let's think in terms of the rule now.
Okay.
It is make a match subject verb agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Who or what is allowing a player to skip ahead and arrive closer to the end goal? Who or what?
Players?
Players is not even in the second half of that sentence, right? And you might be like, well, players is the subject of the first half, right? But because it's a semicolon, we're going to have 2 different subjects and 2 different verbs because we got 2 different standalone statements. Does that make sense?
That's right. Yes.
The players, they're busy encountering the good and bad spaces. We've already got a verb for players.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to find the subject for the allowing. Who or what, and it's going to be in the second half after the semicolon. Who or what is allowing a player to skip ahead and arrive closer to the end goal?
Landing on one of the good spaces?
Landing on one of the good spaces. Landing on one of the good spaces. That's your subject. That's your subject. You could also say just the landing. Okay?
Oh.
That's a thing, by the way. Landing is a thing. This is tricky. Because a lot of students look at that and like, isn't that a verb? Well, it comes from the verb to land. But landing is a thing. Landing a plane is difficult, right? Landing is a thing. It's a thing. It's a noun. It's got a form of a noun called a gerund. You slap
yes.
ing basically on the end of you don't have to know all that, but it's still a thing. Like running is a thing. Like I said, running is my favorite activity. Running that would be the subject there is running. What's your question?
How would you know whether it's plural or not?
Well, that's a question. Let's talk about it. Is landing singular or plural? Is it one thing or is it multiple things? Landing on one of the good spaces. Is that one thing?
One thing?
It's one thing. It's one thing. Now, it's tricky here because the phrase, the subject is landing on one of the good spaces. But you've got two prepositional phrases between the subject and the verb. The subject is landing, and then two prepositional phrases on one of the good spaces. On one is one of the prepositional phrases. The other one is of the good spaces. This is where you have to know prepositions. And they love doing this. They love putting prepositions and prepositional phrases between the subject and the verb to throw you off. Because a lot of students are going to think spaces is the subject, but it's not. Of the good spaces describing one, and on one is describing the landing. But the whole subject is landing on one of the good spaces. And that's one thing. Does that make some sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, Maria, does that make some sense why that's one singular subject? Landing on one of the good spaces.
Yeah, it does.
That's tough. It's just like the pack of wild wolves example, except you got two prepositional phrases between the subject and the verb. Mm-hmm. The subject is never going to be in the prepositional phrases. That's right. You really do have to know or be familiar with prepositions. In fact, I want to go to that in the rules real quick. At the very end of the rules, I've got a list of the 25 most common prepositions. And really the first 10 are the ones you need to know, for sure. Be familiar with all of them. But you got to know the first 10. Of, into, for, with, on, at, from, by, about. The subject is never going to be in a prepositional phrase. So be on the lookout for that. Sometimes you'll see a singular subject followed by a prepositional phrase with a plural word in there. But it's not a plural subject if the plural word is in the prepositional phrase.
Okay.
That's tough. That's tough.
Yeah.
All right. So we got a singular subject here. What's the right answer?
Then it would be A.
It's A. It's A. Absolutely. Now, remember earlier we were talking about subject-verb agreement. I said, if you see one singular and three plurals, the right answer is probably the one singular. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect example of that right here. Which one is singular? Well, again, if you're looking for a singular, test the answer choices with it. It. Can you say it allows, Catherine? It allows. Is that acceptable? It allows.
You can.
Yeah, it allows.
Yes.
It allows you to do something. Okay, yeah. Can you say it are allowing?
No.
No. It have allowed?
No.
No. It allow?
No.
No. They're laughable because those last three are plural. You can say they are allowing or they have allowed or they allow. Those are all plural. You can't say they allows. That's singular. It allows. So even if you're not sure about what the subject is, or if you read like both A and D and you're like, oh, those both sound pretty good, and you're not sure about it, test the answer choices. If you got one singular and three plurals, it's probably the one singular. Or if you got one plural and three singulars, it's probably the one plural. If you can identify you're being tested on make it match subject-verb agreement. Does that make sense, Catherine?
It does.
Do you see why knowing the rules is essential in this test? You can't always go with what sounds good. D doesn't sound terrible. It doesn't.
Yeah.
It does, because you hear good spaces allow. That's why it doesn't sound bad.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the subject. You got to think in terms of the rules. Questions about that?
Nope.
Maria, questions about that?
Nope.
It's tough. But if you know the rules, you're going to avoid a lot of the traps. Okay? We'll keep practicing. This one's tough also. They get a little bit tougher as you go along here in these practice tests. Go ahead and read 27 for us, please, Maria.
In 1943, in the midst of World War II, mathematics professor Grace Hopper was recruited by the U.S. military to help the war effort by solving complex equations. Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations, though. As a pioneering computer programmer, Hopper would help usher in the digital age.
Okay, what do you think about answer choice A? How does that sound to you, Maria?
I didn't read it that well, but I don't think it's right.
You don't think it's right? Why not?
It just feels like there shouldn't be like a split between the sentence.
Yeah.
I feel like it could go all together.
It's weird. It's a little bit weird seeing the colon after though. as well. It's a little bit weird. Plug in B. Let's test the others.
Okay. Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations. Though, as a pioneering computer programmer, Hopper would help usher in the digital age.
How's answer choice B sound?
I don't think it's right either.
Why not? What's wrong with that? I agree with you.
More than just equations. It sounds like, however, but the rest of the sentence doesn't fit that, I guess.
There's another problem with that. Catherine, do you see what the problem is with B? And you got to be on the lookout for this. Anytime you see commas in the answer choices, you've got to be on the lookout for it.
Oh, is it sorry.
Go ahead.
We can go on.
Go ahead, Maria.
I mean, is it because we have, like, the two commas, and, like, that would make the equations and the as a pioneering computer programmer go together?
Well, if you go with answer choice B, you've got two standalone statements separated by a comma. You got to be on the lookout for it anytime you see commas in the answer choices. Listen to the first half. Listen to it. Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations, though. Does that stand alone?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. And then the second half. As a pioneering computer programmer, Hopper would help usher in the digital age. Does that stand alone?
Mm-hmm.
It does. It does. You got two standalone statements separated by a comma. Can't do that. Now you might be like, well, what about ending the sentence with equations? And like, it would still be two standalone statements. Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations. That stands alone. Though, as a pioneering computer programmer, Hopper would help usher in the digital age. Either way, it's two standalone statements, whether you're ending the sentence after equations or after though. Okay. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, it does.
We can't go with it. So look out for two standalone statements separated by a comma. Just test it. Test the parts. Plug in answer choice C. Let's hear C.
Okay. Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations. Though, as a pioneering computer programmer, Hopper would help usher in the digital age.
How's answer choice C sound?
I think it sounds good, but I feel like the though doesn't really work.
I agree with
sentence.
you 100%. It's better than B. What's wrong with though? Starting that second sentence with though. What's wrong with that? Or that last sentence with though?
Well, it makes it seem like it's contrasting, but it's just another statement.
But it's not. It's not a contrast relationship between those last two ideas. Is that clear? And that's what C is suggesting. Here's the last two ideas. Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations. And then the other idea is, as a pioneering computer programmer, Hopper would help usher in the digital age. Those are not contrasting ideas. Not a bit. And C is suggesting they're contrasting ideas. Catherine, does that make sense? Why C, like, grammatically might make some sense, but as far as, like, the meaning of the ideas is off.
Yes, it makes sense.
You've got to read for meaning, because it's more than just, like, a punctuation rule going on here. Like, the meaning of the ideas determines what kind of punctuation we're going to use. So you got to look for meaning. Plug in D. Let's just hear D as well.
Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations, though. As a public,
I gotta stop you. Hold on. You took some pauses that are not there in D.
Yeah,
you got to blast through that.
I noticed that.
Yeah, right. Go and read it accurately.
Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations, though, as a pioneering computer program.
Okay, we can stop. Right. Is it obvious that's terrible?
Yeah.
Be aware of that, too. Like, if you're reading it, you're like, oh, I really want to take a pause there. There's probably a reason why. Right? If that just sounds like trash. You got to have some sort of punctuation.
So I guess, like, A would be
the best option. Let's look at, we know it can't be B, that violates the comma rule. C doesn't make any sense for the meaning. It's not contrasting ideas. D, we got to have a pause. Come on. And I get your iffiness about the colon there, because, like, especially after though, it looks weird, kind of complicated. Now, hold on. Could we have an explanation or description of how Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations?
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. That could work, right? Because that's the next part. As a pioneering computer programmer, Hopper would help usher in the digital age. That is an explanation of how Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations. Now, what's interesting about this is that A and C both have though in them, right? So you might be like, well, isn't A indicating a contrast relationship as well? It is, but if though comes before the colon here, which it does, that's suggesting a contrast relationship with the first sentence in the paragraph.
Oh.
If you go with A. Do you see that? I want you to read the first sentence in the paragraph again.
Okay. In 1943, in the midst of World War II, mathematics professor Grace Hopper was recruited by the U.S. military to help the war effort by solving complex equations.
Okay, and then plug in A again.
Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations, though.
Okay, stop. Do you see why that suggests a contrast relation between the first sentence in the paragraph and the second sentence in the paragraph?
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a little bit weird ending it with though. It is. I wouldn't recommend writing this way. It's just kind of confusing. It is. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
You could also begin the sentence with though, right? You could say, it's not an answer choice, but if you're writing this, it would be acceptable if you said, in 1943, in the midst of World War II, mathematics professor Grace Hopper was recruited by the U.S. military to help the war effort by solving complex equations. However, Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations. That would be fine. Or you could say though, I think, as well. Though Hopper's career would involve more than just equations. However, that's probably what I'd use there. But that is a contrast relationship there between the first and second sentences in the paragraph. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's again why you can't go with C, because C suggests contrast between the second and the third, and that's not going on. Questions about that? Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
That's very tough. But that's again why I recommend thinking in terms of elimination. Like I get your instinct to like reading A and be like, that's weird. I get it. It is. It's a confusing sentence structure. But it doesn't violate a rule in the way B, C, or D does. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you're unsure about it, keep it. Keep it.
Okay.
And focus on elimination. That's why you need to do it. Because the right answer is not always obvious. It's not. It's much easier to get rid of the obviously incorrect ones. So that's the process. Questions about that?
No.
Okay. It's not easy. And again, the ones toward the end get a lot tougher. This is tough as well here. 28. Catherine, go to read 28 for us.
Okay. In 1453, English King Henry VI became unfit to rule after falling gravely ill. As a result, Parliament appointed Richard, 3rd Duke of York, who had a strong claim to the English throne, to rule as Lord Protector. Upon recovering 2 years later, Henry resumed his reign, forcing an angered Richard from the royal court and precipitating a series of battles, later known as the Wars of the Roses.
Woo! All right. What do you think about answer choice A? How does that sound to you, Catherine?
It doesn't sound bad.
It doesn't sound terrible. Okay, let's keep it. Plug in B.
Upon recovering 2 years later, the reign of Henry resumed, forcing an angered Richard from the royal court.
How's that sound?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
It makes sense, I guess.
What's that?
It makes sense.
Okay, let's keep it. Let's try C.
Okay. Upon recovering 2 years later, Henry's reign resumed, forcing an angered Richard from the royal court.
How's answer choice C sound?
I don't know. It doesn't sound bad either.
Okay, it doesn't sound bad. Keep it. We haven't identified the rule yet either, by the way. Right?
Uh-huh.
Try D.
Okay. Upon recovering 2 years later, it was Henry who resumed his reign, forcing an angered Richard from the royal court.
How's D sound?
Not that great.
It doesn't sound that great. That sounds probably the worst of them all. Not a good sign for answer choice. Not a good sign. But it's like, how do you from A, B, C, it could be one of those three. They don't sound bad. They don't. This is where we got to think in terms of the rules. Do you have any idea what rule we're being tested on here?
No.
Maria, do you have any idea what rule we're being tested on here?
Not really.
Yeah, it's not obvious at all. Especially when you look at the answer choices, right? Like there's nothing grammatically, like obviously grammatically incorrect, right? We're not seeing like wrong verb forms or like wrong use of the possessive or like, it's not make it match subject verb agreement. It's not pronouns. It's not obvious at all. If you don't see any obvious grammar issue, you need to think in terms of the misplaced modifier rule. You need to look for it. These are some of the toughest questions. They are. But there's a modifying or descriptive phrase that the last sentence of the paragraph starts with. A modifying phrase. Upon recovering 2 years later. So someone or something is recovering 2 years later. Does that make sense? Why that sentence starts with a descriptive phrase?
Yes.
Yes. So what has to follow that descriptive phrase? Well, who or whatever was recovering 2 years later. Who or what recovered 2 years later?
Henry.
Henry.
Mm-hmm.
So we can get rid of a couple answer choices right off that. I just recognizing that rule. What can we get rid of easily?
Is it C?
Well, are you saying the answer is C, or we can get rid of C?
We can get rid of C.
Why can we get rid of C? I agree. Why can we get rid of C?
Because it's saying that upon recovering 2 years later, Henry's reign resumed.
Yes, Henry's reign, right? It's not Henry. It's Henry's reign, right? It's tricky because you see the word Henry there. A lot of students are going to pick C here. Be tempted by it. But it's not Henry's reign that recovered 2 years later.
It's not B either.
It's not B either. Clearly not. The reign of Henry? That's not what
and it's definitely not D.
And it's definitely not D. It sounded like trash. And the word it begins that answer choice.
Uh-huh.
There's only one that begins with Henry. It's got to be A. Does that make some sense?
Yes.
It's tough to catch, but once you identify you're being tested on that mass police modifiers rule, it becomes clear. Just find out what's the thing that recovered 2 years later. Oh, Henry. Okay. A. Done. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Maria, questions about that? Or is that clear?
That's clear.
Okay. It's very tough to identify the rule, but once you identify the rule, it's pretty clear. That's the case there. All right. We got a little more time. I think we're going to be able to finish at least this module here, and we are heading now into the transition word questions. Okay. This is how they're going to wrap up the grammar at the end of each module. Is these transition words, and you know that by just kind of previewing the answer choice. Look, it's by contrast, consequently, secondly, for example. Answer choice A is clearly going to be a contrast relationship. Answer choice B is going to be cause and effect, consequently, as a consequence of that. Secondly, that's going to be a sequence relationship, and then answer choice D is providing examples relationship, right? So we know we're there. Once you get to the transition word questions, we're not plugging these in right off the bat like we did with all the others. Because if you plug in answer choice A right off the bat, you're priming your brain for a contrast relationship that may or may not be there. You don't know. So I really just recommend reading the paragraph and just kind of like skip past the blank portion. You don't even have to read blank. Just read through it without anything. But don't plug them in. And let's see if we can identify the two ideas and identify the relationship between the two ideas. Does that make some sense, Maria?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So go ahead and read that, but just don't plug in here.
Okay. Although novels and poems are considered distinct literary forms, many authors have credited or created hybrid works that incorporate elements of both. Bernardine Evaristo's The Emperor's Babe, Blank, is a verse novel, a book-length narrative complete with characters and a plot, but conveyed in short, crisp lines of poetry rather than prose.
Interesting. Okay. A lot of words there. It's kind of some lengthy sentences. Let's identify the two ideas first. What's the first idea in the first sentence? What's the main idea of that first sentence?
I mean that you can combine poems and novels.
Yeah. Many authors have combined poems and novels into one hybrid form. That's it. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. What's the second idea in the second sentence?
I mean, it's just giving an example of.
Yeah, it's an example, right? Yeah. What's the right answer?
D.
It's D. Very clearly.
Okay.
Now, you might have gotten that by plugging them all in. It'll probably sound the best. Mm-hmm. But you're going to get it just by identifying the relationship. And sometimes by plugging it in, it's not clear at all. I think the better path is to start by trying to identify the relationship. It's just an example of a hybrid work. So it's D. Questions about that, or is that pretty clear?
That one was pretty clear.
Okay. Plug it in. I do want to hear it real quick before we move on. I just want to make sure it works, but it should.
Okay. Wait, which one do you want me to plug in?
D. Plug in D.
Okay. Although novels and poems are considered distinct literary forms, many authors have created hybrid works that incorporate elements of both. Bernardine Evaristo's The Emperor's Babe For example, is a verse novel, a book-length narrative complete with characters and a plot, but conveyed in short, crisp lines of poetry rather than prose.
How's that sound?
It sounds good.
It sounds great. Yeah, that's it for sure. That is deep. Questions about that? Okay. Catherine, questions about that?
Nope, it makes sense.
Okay, great. All right. Catherine, we've got another transition word question here. Go and read 30 for us. Same thing here. Don't plug in. Just read the two ideas. Let's see if we can identify the relationship.
Okay. At 2 weeks old, the time their critical socialization period begins, wolves can smell but cannot yet see or hear. Domestic dogs can see, hear, and smell by the end of 2 weeks. This relative lack of sensory input may help explain why wolves behave so differently around humans than dogs do. From a very young age, wolves are more wary and less exploratory.
Okay, good. By the way, notice the use of the colon there at the end of the sentence, right? I don't think it relates a whole lot to the right answer, but I just want to point it out. In case you're confused about when you can use certain punctuation marks, look at the correct examples they give you in the other questions, right? You know what I'm saying? You're like, wait, when do I use a colon? Yeah. Oh, well, look. And here it would be a colon as an explanation or description of why wolves behave so differently around humans than dogs do.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Right? And it's not just the word before. It's not just dogs or dogs do. It's why wolves behave so differently around humans than dogs do. It could be a bigger idea. That's the case here. Just like that worms question as well. It could be a bigger idea. Be aware of that. But and the same thing like with 31. If you're confused about the M dash, you look at 31 that's on the screen share, right? There's an M dash there. And we know it's correct usage. So see how they use it in case you forget. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, good. Let's go back to the question here. What are the two ideas here? Okay, what are the two ideas?
Well, one idea is like about wolves and how they can smell but not see or hear.
Yep.
And then they introduce domestic dogs that can see, hear, and smell.
There you go. Yeah. What's the relationship between those two ideas?
Contrast.
What's the answer?
See?
It's C, right? They're nice enough to make, it's a contrast relationship and the answer is by contrast.
Yeah.
Absolutely, right? There's no other contrast transition word there. Perfect. Questions about that, or is that clear?
That was pretty clear.
Okay, now again, if you plugged them in, you'd probably find it as well. You probably would. But sometimes it's not so clear. I don't like 31. It's not going to be clear at all. We'll test it here in just a minute. I start with trying to identify the ideas and identify the relationships. Start there. Let's do 31. Maria, you are up.
Researchers, Helena M.
Those ladies. And that guy. Yeah, good enough.
And Lucia and Marco report that while mathematicians may have traditionally worked alone, evidence points to a shift in the opposite direction. Blank mathematicians are choosing to collaborate with their peers, a trend illustrated by a rise in the number of mathematics publications credited to multiple authors.
Ooh, this is tough. What's the first idea here? Let's make that really clear. The first idea in the first sentence.
Just saying that, like just showing that mathematicians typically work alone.
Yeah, and that evidence points to a shift in the opposite direction. Yeah, they're not working on as much. What's the main idea in the second sentence?
It's just showing that mathematicians are now choosing to collaborate. Yeah,
now they're choosing to collaborate. Absolutely. That's it. Okay. Mm-hmm. That relationship I do not think is obvious. There's clearly a relationship, but they're related ideas. But what the relationship is exactly is not super clear. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's not. Or do you think you see it or no?
I think I would go with B or D.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'm still not sure.
Yeah, it's not obvious. It's not. There's a couple ways to look at this question. Okay. And let's look at the answer choice and talk about what relationships each answer choice signifies. Because we can also think in terms of elimination here. What relationship does answer choice A signify?
That point, the first sentence and second sentence have a similar topic.
Have some similar. Clearly they're on the topic of mathematicians collaborating with their peers.
Yeah.
But it's not.
Or just yeah.
Yeah. It's all going to be. It's going to be sentences in the same paragraph. There's going to be some similarities in general. But the question, if it's a similarity relationship, can you identify what the similarity is here between these two ideas?
Not really.
It's not super clear, right? And compare that to like the ice cream example, right? I like eating ice cream. Also, I like eating brownies. What's the similarity? Two things I like to eat, right?
Yeah.
It's not. There's not an obvious similarity here. There's not. What relation would answer choice B signify?
Like, oh, I guess it wouldn't be B. It's sort of saying because the research was done,
because of
they're
this, right?
working.
Yes, that's a cause and effect relationship, is what B signifies. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And is the first thing causing the second thing here?
No.
No, it's not. Catherine, does that make sense? Why it's not a cause and effect relationship here?
Yes, it does make
It's
sense.
not.
Yeah.
It's not. Again, they're related in some way, but it's not cause and effect. What relationship does answer choice C signify, Maria?
Like a continuation.
Yeah, that's also a similarity relationship. Furthermore, let's go back to the rules real quick. And see, similarity. Yeah, furthermore, similarly is not on here, though similarly would be a similarity relation. But furthermore is a similarity relationship, transition word. And the reason I point this out is that if you see two answer choices of the same relationship, if you see two similarity transition words, like you see here with A and C, you can probably get rid of them. Because if A works, C is probably going to work too, if it's a similarity relationship. Does that make some sense?
Yeah.
Or if you saw two contrast transition words, you can probably get rid of them because they're probably not going to give you two right answers. They're not going to. Does that make sense? Now, if like the other two that are left don't work at all, okay, you can consider the other two because it happens occasionally. There are some cases where you can say however, but you can't say nevertheless. That happens, but it's very rare. So in general, I think as a rule of thumb, if you see two of the same relationship, just get rid of them. It's not similarity here. So A and C are gone. What about answer choice D?
That makes sense.
It could make some sense. Right? Now, it's interesting. It's not one of the 5 main relationships. It's not. You might see some others. Kind of like answer choice A. Look at answer choice A for number 30, in other words. That's like indicating like or rephrasing the first idea in the second idea. You could see some others, right? It's not an exhaustive list of the relationships. It's not an exhaustive list of the major transition words. It's not. But plug in D. I want to hear D and see if it works.
Okay. Okay, so just, I guess, do you want me to start from the beginning?
Yeah, take from the start. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Researchers Helena, Lucia, and Marco report that while mathematicians may have traditionally worked alone, evidence points to a shift in the opposite direction. Increasingly, mathematicians are choosing to collaborate with their peers, a trend illustrated by a rise in the number of mathematics publications credited to multiple authors.
How's that sound?
It sounds good.
It sounds good. It is D. That is the best there. Questions about that, or does that make some sense?
That makes sense.
Okay, I think your best path there is probably elimination. Or at least if it's not obvious that it's, D, and I couldn't even tell you exactly what the relationship with D is. I know it works. I mean, just something is developing at an increasing rate. Okay, great. But it's not A, it's not C, it's not B. Okay, great. That's good enough. And D sounds good when you plug it in. So you don't have to know everything, just enough to settle on the right answer choice. That's the case here. Questions about that?
Nope.
Catherine, any questions?
Nope, it makes sense.
Okay, good. Let's wrap it up there. We just finished that module and I finished on time today. Yay! So let's do this for homework. I'm going to send this all to you also in an email for you guys. Notice, by the way, the module ends with these notes questions. We'll get to those when we study the reading section, day 3 and day 4. There's a nice trick to those questions. We'll come back to those. But on the same practice test, there's a module 2. And if we scroll down to question 19 again, we get past the reading comprehension questions, scrolling down, getting there. Eventually, question 19, there 18 and 19. Great. We get back to the grammar questions. So I want you to do all of the grammar questions on module 2. That's going to be questions 19 through 30. 19 through 30. So it's just like, I don't know, it's like 12 questions. What's that?
Are they the same questions that we did today, right?
Well, I want you to redo those on your own. Sorry, yeah. Okay. I want you to redo the ones that we did. And if you're unsure, if you can't figure out how to find the right answer, again, just review the solution in the video. But then I'm going to have you do 12 new questions also on module 2. So that'll be 19 through 30. Again, I'll send this to you in an email. 19 through 30. And practice applying the rules. Think in terms of the rules for all these questions. Okay, try to identify which rule or rules potentially they're testing you on. Okay, and then at the beginning of the day 2 session, we'll actually start with those questions, and we should be able to go through them relatively quickly if you've done the homework. And we'll just kind of go through your thought processes and see what worked and maybe where you went wrong as well and fix it as well. So do those new questions, and we'll begin our next session with those questions. Do you ladies have any questions for me at the moment?
No.
Okay, good. How are you feeling about the grammar section right now on the digital SAT?
Honestly, better.
Good. Catherine?
Yeah, it's better than what I thought before,
Yeah.
but it's still confusing.
It takes some practice. But you got to get beyond the whole I'll just go with what sounds the best. That doesn't always work. It's a good start. And sometimes it's enough to get the right answer, but you really have to know the rules. So when you're going through these, don't just go to the old way of doing things. Don't just go with whatever sounds good, or just guessing. Try to figure out what the rule is and apply the rule to start. Does that make some sense?
Yes.
And if you can't figure out the rule, great, go with your gut instinct. And sometimes that'll get the right answer, maybe a lot of the time. But think in terms of the rules and let that guide you. All right? Any questions?
Nope.
Okay. You ladies have been awesome. And we'll continue the grammar section here on day 2 next week. And I look forward to seeing you then. All right?
Got it.
Have a
Thank
great day
you.
and a great week. I'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.